There are two ways to get to the same point. One way is theoretical, insistent, constant practice. The other way is casting about, looking for the right way. I mean, practice, practice, practice. When you speak about music, practice is what in language we call theory. That means doing the same repetitive things, aiming for the best, trying to do our best. The constant, intelligent, informed practice makes us nearly perfect. But now and then we need also to fly by the seat of our pants. That means to play off the top of our heads, putting into practice, pardon the pun, what we've been practicing. Most of the people you see improvising so fluently and freely, they have been through the mill. That means they've been practicing a lot. Scales, intervals, patterns. They've been listening to records, trying to write down or playing back what they've been listening before. That is a kind of practice, but not just playing random. It will take more time just playing random. You could make it before the first stages of jazz, but then jazz became too complicated to just learn it through try and errors, via this. Every day I don't know what I'm gonna do, let's play whatever comes to my mind. No, it doesn't work like that. When you've been through a lot of this process, you've been practicing for years in a almost crazy way, like a maniac, you can reach the point of really fluency in your playing. People who are very, very fussy, meticulous when they practice, and they are very demanding, they go on stage and they play like it's the easiest thing to do. But this thing that is considered normal, playing long notes when it comes to wind instruments, I know one thing or two about that because I play wind instruments. Long notes, scales, intervals, strange rhythmic patterns, and putting everything together in jazz. So you have in your mind some pa pa ta pa ta pa pa, and you mix with some also intervals, and you have a lot of thing to do in your mind when you play, and you try to put them together and they make sense. So use your right and your left part of your brain. You become an accomplished player. I speak about the jazz because jazz is the music where closest to language, because you improvise. You don't just read. In normal life, when you speak a language, you don't read it. Okay? You draw on your knowledge you have in your brain of the language in real time. And that's what happens in jazz. Okay, my idea is that you, in a way, have to practice a language the same way people practice jazz. I'm sorry, that's not jazz, that's classical music, but I like it too. It's late at night, I don't want to bother my neighbors. Okay, so my new idea, and I'm trying to put into practice, is to constantly practice pattern rules. I will say in a repetitive way, because you practice the rule, I go adding always something different. When I practice, for example, a major chord, I practice first just the notes. C, E, G, C, E, G, B, and then I add some rhythm. Da, 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 da. So, do, mi, sol, si. And I add variety. So I'm always practicing a major chord, but I get two birds with a stone, because at the same time, when it's under my finger, when I don't have to think, I can add new things. So when I practice, I go, you go, she goes, I add something that makes sense. At the same time, I add some variety of vocabulary. I go home, I go to the station, but at the same time I have to add something, because I need to know where and how to use the present simple. So I say, I go home, I come back home every day at 5. Okay? I go to work every day. I rarely go to work by bus. So first I practice, and then it's very easy. I immediately make it a little bit more complicated, but at the same time I know when to use the present simple. So we don't just learn the present simple. We learn also when to use it, and usually in common sentences with the vocabulary that is usually associated with the present simple, so frequency adverbs. That's the idea. But you have to do that like a routine, until the point that you feel like gloated, you are really fed up with this. Okay, I know it, like the back of my hand. Okay, I can do it also backwards. I know it. So you raise the bar and you make it a little bit complicated until the present simple. You know the present simple, you know all the frequency adverbs and frequency expressions like every day, now and then, oftentimes, more often than not. And you also learn the go, to, use to, direction, and direction and house, home. You know that you go home and on to house, and you learn that you go towards direction. If you have like this timetable schedule of things you've got to do, and then you know, okay, this I know, or these are the mistakes I make, I write those mistakes and I check after some time if I make the same mistake, so I write some hand personally made exercises where after some days I will check if I really understood this, if I've really absorbed and internalized the right thing, and I don't make the same mistakes. So that's the idea. So during the lessons, my lessons, I try to make understand, for example, the rule through examples, many examples. Actually, you need to provide your student with a very good example, a very understandable example, with the right words, the right choice, so the person will understand. You have to rephrase. Have a little money. The students need to know that little, in this case, refers to quantity, not to the size. So if you say, I have a little money, it means I don't have much money. Okay? That's very important, to rephrase the sentence, not to explain in the language, in the student's language, or because many times you don't even know the student's language. But I would say you mustn't close the door, shut the door. It means you are obliged not to shut the door. If I say you're obliged not to shut the door, okay, I order you not to shut the door. Okay? You mustn't shut the door. Okay? It's bad. You're not supposed to do that. You mustn't shut the door. You understand, mustn't is the negative obligation. You haven't to shut the door. You can shut the door, or maybe you let it open. It's up to you. You haven't to shut the door. We don't ask you that. We don't demand. But if you want to close the door, you can. Okay, Mozart. That's the way to go, because this is a foolproof way of teaching. Maybe it's a little bit longer than explaining the rule. Okay, you explain in English, although you always use English. If the explanation is not clear, you mustn't close the door because I need it to open. I like a draft. Okay, I want some air. You mustn't. Okay, there are several ways. An accomplished teacher has the ability to come up with a really clear sentence, explanatory, to explain things. It takes time, as I always use this way. It's good. Then you have them practice a lot. You tell how to make sentences at home, how to repeat, and so on and so forth. So if you every day practice your good sentences, your good patterns, adding more vocabulary, but you know you should add the right vocabulary. Okay? So if you practice vocabulary, for example, food, okay, you can ask some recipes with different food, and so you practice the food, but at the same time some verbs like stir, knead, not need, with K-N-E-A-D, like cook, boil, stew, always in a context. So even what you think it's repetitive, it's boring, is not really boring, but it's focused. So you learn vocabulary and in a context. That's the best thing to do. What I do not recommend is learning words out of a context. So this new approach is another thing. Pressing. The student needs to be exposed to a lot of language. So my idea is not to speak very slowly, but using known vocabulary. When you use known vocabulary, familiar vocabulary, you can speak fast. The student needs to be exposed a little bit to a fast language. Every time you have to raise the bar, every time you use the same things that you've been using before, you should as fast as a native speaker. Otherwise, if you do the same things you've been doing before, the same speed, it's wasted time. You're not gonna teach anything. He's not going to learn anything. If you introduce new vocabulary, try to slow down. Okay? The student cannot face two problems at the same time. So when this vocabulary is repeated, because you have to repeat oftentimes, every lesson you have to take stock of the vocabulary you've been practicing on the patterns and repeat even later. Okay? So the teacher has to keep track of what he's been doing and the students have been doing up to now. This is very important. That's why I like assimil, because assimil introduces something and don't let that during the lesson. In the other lessons, the following lessons repeats. So the student assimilates. That's called assimil. The teacher has to do that, and the student has to do that. Always review, until you know for certain that you can understand and use these patterns, words with the right pronunciation, even if you're drunk, even if you are tired, even if you're half asleep, even if you are out of your mind, you are in anger, angry, hungry, thirsty, you are sweating, you're running, whatever. It's part of you. It's in the long-term memory. That's the idea. Having as many common patterns, words, idioms in the long-term memory. Another thing concerning English. English is full of idioms. So I strongly recommend from the beginning learning idioms, because it takes years. Obviously, you should learn the most common idioms. Sometimes are so common that I wouldn't even call that an idiom. It's the standard way. So to dismiss someone is already to fire. Okay, so a steady job is a 9 to 5 many times. I'm nuts is as common as I'm crazy. So let's practice average English, the English that is spoken. That is the language people learn. So sometimes people learn a very formal language. I wouldn't go for slang or too familiar, but a middle class, the language that a middle class person would speak at home. This is the language that foreigners are supposed to speak. So if you think about when foreigners speak your language, if they speak a much too formal language, it sounds weird to you, even if they speak a much too familiar language. Okay? That is the language an English student should speak. Concerning accents, okay, I have a weird accent because I live in Italy, but I lived in England and I lived in the United States. I'm one of the few people who has no bias, is not biased, has no bias. I really think that these are just two different things. It's like asking me if I prefer, I don't know, chocolate or chicken. I like both. I think actually the English I prefer, that I don't speak, is a good Australian English, because it's quite neutral. Me, after Australian, I like Canadian. But also here, if you need to get an accent, get not a posh accent, not a Cockney, or no, you shouldn't speak with a drawl. It would sound quite funny to hear a foreigner say, "Howdy, I'm gonna fix myself something to eat." No, that's not. I mean, but even if you live in the south of the United States, I don't know if you're supposed to speak like that. I mean, like in Western movies even. So you just learn standard American or RP English. I think not the Queen's English. RP, I think swear English. I mean, something in the middle of the way English between Cockney and posh accent, upper class accent. The only thing you should be consistent. I mean, if you have an American accent and you use British words, it's quite funny. Sometimes happens to me, but Okay, there is a reason. If I could avoid it, I would. But sometimes, being exposed to both languages, I'm not consistent. So, okay. Usually, you should know that if you have a British accent, you should speak British English. It's only natural. Oh. Okay, it's a long-winded video. I really felt the urge because I had this idea, and if we apply the same rules of learning music to languages, I know it's a different thing, but we have the same brain, and they have something in common, and that would give students the idea that it's a serious thing, because many times music students or people who practice sport know that there is some serious practice involved in, and they should apply themselves. But sometimes language students think that learning a foreign language is a piece of cake. Like, okay, you learn just I watch movies. Okay, I'm sorry, but I've listened to so much jazz in my life. It helped me playing jazz, but really, without any serious, focused practice, however much I've been listening to that, I wouldn't have accomplished anything serious. The same thing goes for language. If you practice seriously, in a proactive way, you get feedback, you check on yourself, you review what you've been doing, you see after a while if you have really absorbed, you see constant improvement. Okay, and then you can go out and speak with people. But having all this serious work behind, because when I used to run and I resumed running, when I have competition, races, I went knowing that I've been running not random every day. I knew what I would do, and this was a programming. I have a plan. I had a feedback with times, but I had a plan. People who didn't have a plan, who already ran without knowing whether they were coming or going, with no plan, the same time devoted to running, they were not that good. Okay, some days I have no plan. I have no plan some days. Let's say one day it's Spartak, I go out, I stay out for a run for 45 minutes, I follow my instinct. Or one day out of 7. The other 6 days I knew what I was doing. And I recommend that with languages. Most of the times you know what you're doing. And you can do it in a creative way. I say you can, I gave you some examples. I haven't given many examples about pronunciation. Maybe I will. Pronunciation is to languages what good sound is to music. So what I recommend as for music is to learn the right sounds before. Okay, so new students of clarinet and trumpet play long notes just to have the right sounds before they face difficult music, like concerning fingerings, because if you don't have a good sound, when you do something fast, the sound goes to the dog. Okay, wayside. So the same thing, if you don't have facility pronouncing words, then when you will face long sentences or long complicated patterns, you have to struggle with the pattern and the pronunciation. If your pronunciation is already acquired and steady, it will be easier for you facing other problems. And if you have solved this problem at the beginning, everything you learn will be with the right pronunciation. Otherwise, you will have to learn, unlearn, and relearn the same words many times, because you're not aware of the right sound, and you don't know how to memorize words, because how can you memorize sounds if you're not aware of the sound? Becoming aware is also learning the symbol, and when you learn the symbol, first you learn the sound, and this is the symbol. So you have a visual part and that match the audio part. Okay? This is was a very interesting video, because I introduced new concepts, whilst in the other videos I always harped on the same things, very common sense, but this is, I think, is something new. I will look into it in the future videos. I will think about it, and maybe I will come up with a creative, serious way of learning a language that puts together creative and drills. Okay? I know I'm not humble. I don't pretend to be. Thanks for watching anyway.